I canned apples 4 different ways this year, and today I'm going to show you the most popular way of doing it that I will never try again, and my favorite way of canning apples that I will definitely be using next year. With apple season upon us, we knew canning apples had to start with a trip to our favorite orchard. There is one not far from us where we pick peaches, strawberries, and cherries, but with apples, this farm truly shines. For our first trip, we picked Gala's for eating and Cortland's for canning applesauce. And with a wagon of over 35 pounds of apples and some late season peaches, I was ready to try my hand at canning applesauce. I was determined to only use the tools I had on hand for this first batch. So I had my $13 apple peeler from Amazon, my handheld apple corer, and a paring knife. I got to work washing, peeling, coring, and slicing every apple in the batch. It took quite a bit of time since I was working with about 12 pounds of apples for the first batch. You truly don't know how many apples you have until you have measured them out. I had so many trays filling my kitchen, and as you can see, all the ones here, well, this was less than a third of the apples we picked that day. And here's that little $13 Amazon apple peeler. It worked well enough, but obviously not the greatest tool. The back did pop off a few times while I was peeling, but it got the job done, and I had all of these peels left, ready to go. I still wish I had a food compost of some sort. I then put all the apples in an oversized stock pot and filled it with water about halfway up the apples, and then I let the apples cook for about 10 minutes. When I was done, they were very soft and ready to make some applesauce. And since all the recipes for canning applesauce called for water, I just used the water I had boiled the apples in and add some sugar to taste and a few tablespoons of lemon juice. It's debatable whether the lemon juice is a necessity for canning applesauce, but I figured it wouldn't do any harm. I blended the applesauce in my food processor, which wasn't my best plan. I had to work in small batches and transfer everything to a second stock pot while blending. I also did not love blending hot apples in a plastic food processor. I didn't think about this until I was in the thick of it and did not have a food mill or an immersion blender on hand to use instead. So I moved forward and I worked quickly, and it got the job done. After all of the blending in the food processor and dirtying up way more dishes than I expected to that day, I was ready to bring the applesauce back to a boil and fill my jars that I had been keeping warm in my water bath canner. But as you can see here, the applesauce spit at me a little bit and almost burned me. I was okay though, I'm used to it by now. With all the different cooking and baking that I've done through the years, and even working in a bakery for a while, you get used to burns and pots spitting things at you. And so you just get over it and move on and brush it off. I even got a steam burn from the apple canning this year, but it'll all turn out fine. It all works out in the end. I then checked my jars for air bubbles, wiped the rims, and put on the lids and rings for water bath canning. I canned my pints for 20 minutes and they came out beautifully. Although this was such a long process, the applesauce is a beautiful pale golden color, and my kids all adore it, which, having 5 kids, they're very difficult to all please. I was so pleased with the result, but I wanted to find an easier way to can applesauce. If you are looking for a way to can it without having a food mill, this would be the way to do it. But after careful consideration, this was just not the best method. So my conclusion here is that this way of doing applesauce, although delicious, was just way too time consuming for what I wanted to do. So it was on to our second method of canning apples. After a lot of research, I learned that the most popular way to can apples is to leave the skins on and then let a food mill do the work of removing the skins after you boil the apples. I felt it was worth a shot, so I bought a food mill. You can find this one that I have in the description. And I got to work washing, slicing, and coring my apples and skipping the time-consuming peeling this time with my tiny little peeler. Unfortunately, the process turned into a disaster. Despite my better judgment, I followed what many other recipes said to do, which was use significantly less water when boiling your apples, just enough so the apples don't stick. But this did not work well. The apples actually started burning at the bottom because the water evaporated so quickly. And when I put the apples through the food mill, they would not push through. The peels were constantly clogging the mill and causing a large loss in apples. So this was my least favorite way of canning apples. Not only did I have a large loss of apples, but leaving the skins on changed the flavor of the applesauce and gave it a pink hue. None of us were fans of this applesauce, but I still canned it as a baking applesauce for our favorite muffins and oatmeal bake. I wasn't about to let all of that hard work on this very late night go to waste. Sadly, all that hard work only got me these 5 small pints of applesauce. There wasn't much there because of all of the loss, but I made the most of it and I still canned them, getting out all the air bubbles, putting on my lids and seals, and then making sure that I canned them for their 20 minutes in my water bath canner. But I will most definitely not be doing this method again. I can't believe how time-consuming and difficult it actually was. But stay tuned, because at the end, I am going to tell you my surprisingly favorite way to can apples that even I didn't expect. Now, because I couldn't help myself, when we went back to the apple orchard, I had to get more Kaitlyn's to try canning applesauce yet again. I was determined to find a process I like, and I was not about to admit defeat with the food mill. Everyone who cans uses them, and I knew I just had to figure it out. So this time I combined my first 2 methods. I peeled, cored, and quartered a whole bunch more Kaitlyn's, so much so that I have lost track of how many pounds there were. I then boiled with water over halfway up the full stock pot like I did the first time. And after the apples were plenty soft, I put them through the food mill to create a smooth applesauce. Now, this sauce was not as smooth as the food processor, but still very smooth and delicious, with no bitter taste or pink hue from boiling with the peel on. And I was very happy with the process and would can applesauce this way again. Here you can see why I liked it. But this was not my favorite way of canning apples. Actually, my favorite way was canning apple slices. I was so surprised by this because I did not plan on canning apple slices this year until our 9-year-old begged me to give it a shot. So I figured, what's the worst that can happen? So we picked over 20 pounds of Fuji apples at our favorite orchard yet again for canning slices, and I got to work. The one thing I wish is that I would have bought an apple peeler corer slicer like I had planned to earlier this summer. I thought I wouldn't use it this year, and it turns out it would have saved me a lot of time and effort. So instead, I peeled, cored, and then sliced the apples into thin strips. Thankfully, my stint in culinary school taught me how to be quick with a knife, so the process wasn't as exhausting as I had expected. But I will be ordering a peeler corer slicer before next season, and I suggest you do the same. After slicing, I put the apples in a water and lemon juice combo that was 1.5 cups lemon juice and 6 cups of water. Then I made a light sugar syrup in my pot that I heated up until the sugar was no longer visible in the water. I added my apple slices and stirred them and the sugar syrup together. I brought the whole mixture to a boil and then reduced it to a simmer for about 5 minutes. And then I filled my warm, clean jars with the apples, leaving 1/2 inch of headspace, and then filled them the rest of the way with the sugar syrup. After filling all of my jars, I gently got out all of the air bubbles as best as I could. I wiped off the rims of the jars, added my lids and rings, and then boiled them in my water bath canner. I did some pints and some quarts, so my quarts I canned for about 30 minutes and my pints I did for about 20. This was such a fast and satisfying way to can apples compared to applesauce. We've done frozen apple slices in the past, and this gave such a better result than freezing with the same use as pies, crisps, toppings, and a Dutch baby with some cinnamon. And even though this first year of canning apples was a lot of learning, I feel prepared for next year with my favorite and most efficient ways to can, and hopefully this info helps you prepare too. Thanks for watching and joining us on our apple picking and canning adventures. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss any of our videos, and click on this video here that YouTube suggested just for you.